The refugee fleet drifted through the darkness of space like broken birds, struggling to stay airborne. 17 ships holding 12,000 Kalari souls who had nowhere left to go. Their hull plating scorched from weapons fire that had destroyed their world 3 months ago. Their engines running on fumes and prayers that nobody seemed to hear anymore. Captain Vesta stood on the bridge of the lead vessel and stared at the star charts with 4 eyes that had stopped crying weeks ago. Though the pain never stopped, never even paused long enough to let him breathe without remembering everything they had lost: his homeworld burning, his government executed, his people scattered across the void like seeds thrown into a hurricane. 37 rejections, his navigation officer said quietly from her station, her voice carrying the weight of every closed door, every turn back, every polite refusal that meant the same thing: you are not our problem. The first rejection had come from the Thalaxian Commonwealth. Those proud beings who claimed to value all sentient life, who built monuments to peace and understanding, while their council chambers echoed with cold calculations about resource allocation and economic projections that somehow never found room for 12,000 refugees who had committed no crime except being born on the wrong planet. Vex remembered standing in that grand hall with its crystal columns and floating lights, remembered presenting their case with documentation of the Dominion attack, medical records of wounded children, testimony from survivors who watched their families die. And the Thalaxian Chancellor had listened with what seemed like sympathy before explaining why helping them was simply impossible. Too many refugees already. Too much strain on social systems. Too much risk of cultural conflict. Too much everything except actual compassion. After the Thalaxians came the Rex Empire. Then the Scattered Worlds Alliance. Then civilization after civilization, each with their own reasons why accepting Kalari refugees would be difficult or dangerous or simply inconvenient for their carefully balanced societies. His medical officer approached with a report that Vexta already knew would be bad. Could read it in the way she held her datapad, like it weighed more than it should. 2 weeks, she said. Meaning 2 weeks of medical supplies, 2 weeks of food rations. 2 weeks before they would have to start making the kind of choices that would haunt whoever survived long enough to remember making them. The children? Vexta asked, though he did not want to know. Hungry. Sir, all of them hungry. And the youngest ones are getting sick from malnutrition, from stress, from living in ships that were never meant to house people this long. Vexta nodded and turned back to the star charts, searching for something he had searched for 100 times before. Any planet, any station, any place in this vast galaxy that might show mercy to people who had done nothing wrong except lose a war they never wanted to fight. Sir, the navigation officer called out, her voice carrying a strange mixture of hope and desperation that made Vexta's hearts beat faster. There is a system here. G-type star. 3rd planet shows signs of civilization. Classification? Vexta moved to her station, looking at the readings. Class 3. Barely spacefaring, primitive by council standards. They call themselves humans. Call their planet Earth? The bridge went quiet because everyone understood what this meant. Approaching a primitive species violated galactic code, interfered with natural development, risked contamination of an emerging culture, broke every rule that civilized beings were supposed to follow. But Vexta thought about the children growing thinner every day, thought about families who had already lost everything being asked to lose even more, thought about dignity and rules and what any of it meant when people were dying. Set course, he said, his voice steady despite everything. We will not ask them for sanctuary. That would be wrong. But perhaps they can spare supplies. Perhaps they can point us toward unclaimed space where we might settle without bothering anyone. The fleet turned toward the small blue planet, moving slowly on damaged engines. And Vextha tried not to hope, because hope had failed them 37 times already. 3 days later, Earth's primitive detection systems picked up their approach. And Vextha listened to their radio chatter with translation software, heard the panic and confusion as these young species tried to understand what 17 alien ships approaching their homeworld might mean. A voice came through, speaking careful English that the translation software rendered into Kalari, asking them to identify themselves and state their intentions. A young human male who sounded nervous but determined at Vesta opened a channel and chose his words carefully, not wanting to frighten them more than his fleet's presence already had. I am Captain Vextha of the Kalari people. We are refugees fleeing the Dominion expansion. Our homeworld was destroyed 3 months ago. We have been rejected by 37 civilized worlds. We do not ask for sanctuary because that would violate your development rights. But we are desperate for supplies and coordinates to unclaimed space where we might settle without interfering with established territories. The silence that followed felt longer than the 3 months since his world died. Longer than the journey through space being turned away again and again. Longer than anything Vextha had ever experienced. Then a different voice came through. Female, older, carrying authority that made Vextha straighten despite his exhaustion. Captain Vextha. I am Ambassador Lauren Mitchell, representing the United Nations of Earth. We have received your message and are convening emergency leadership to discuss your situation. In the meantime, please accept these coordinates for a safe orbit around our moon. We will send medical supplies and food immediately. And sir, you do not have to beg us for basic decency. Vextha felt something break inside him. Something that had been holding together through rejections and loss and watching his people suffer. Felt tears start falling from eyes that had been too tired to cry. Felt his crew around him reacting with shock and disbelief because nobody had spoken to them with simple kindness. And so long, they had forgotten what it sounded like. You would help us? He asked, his voice breaking. Your species is Class 3. You have your own problems, your own people to care for. Why would you? Because you asked, Ambassador Mitchell said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the galaxy. And because we can, now please, let us send those supplies. Your children have waited long enough. The Kalari fleet moved into orbit around Earth's moon, and within hours human ships arrived carrying food and medicine. Primitive vessels by galactic standards, but moving with purpose and care. And when the first human medical team came aboard Vextha's ship, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, who immediately went to check on the sickest children. Vextha finally understood something that 37 advanced civilizations had failed to teach him, that civilization was not measured by technology or power or the size of your empire, but by what you did when someone asked for help. The United Nations emergency session began 6 hours after first contact. Representatives from every nation gathering in chambers that suddenly felt too small for the weight of what they were being asked to decide. Screens showing images of the Kalari fleet in orbit, of families huddled in damaged ships, of children with faces that looked different from human children, but carried the same expression of fear and hunger that any parent would. Recognized President Nicole Harper stood at the podium watching the assembly argue, listening to concerns about resources and security and economic impact, hearing the same kinds of calculations that 37 other civilizations had made before deciding that helping refugees was simply too difficult. Senator Kevin Bradley led the opposition with charts and graphs showing Earth's own poverty, Earth's own hungry children, Earth's own struggles that seemed overwhelming enough without adding 12,000 alien refugees to the burden. We can barely feed our own people, Bradley said, his voice carrying across the chamber. We have homeless veterans sleeping on streets. We have children going to bed hungry in every nation represented here. We have our own problems that demand our resources. And now we are being asked to take on the galaxy's problems too? The argument made sense, made the kind of cold logical sense that had convinced 37 civilizations to turn away. And Harper watched representatives nodding along, watched the tide turning toward rejection. Then Representative Michelle Santos stood, a small woman from Brazil who had grown up in poverty herself, who understood hunger not as a statistic but as a memory. "We are talking about children dying in space," Santos said quietly, her voice somehow cutting through all the noise and calculation. "We are talking about families who have lost everything, who have been turned away by every advanced civilization in the galaxy, who came to us not because we are powerful or rich, but because they are desperate, and we were the last hope they had left." The chamber went quiet, as P.S. Santos pulled up images on the main screen, pictures that human medical teams had taken aboard the Kalari, ship's children, who looked nothing like human children, but whose suffering was universal. Parents holding sick babies with expressions that crossed all species boundaries. Elderly refugees sitting in corners with eyes that had seen too much loss. Every advanced civilization looked at these people and saw a burden. Santos continued, a voice growing stronger. "I propose we look at them and see what we have always seen in the desperate fellow beings who need help. And yes, we have our own problems, our own poor, our own struggling. But when has humanity ever been at its best by turning away from suffering because helping was inconvenient?" The debate continued for hours. Voices rising and falling, concerns raised and addressed. But something had shifted in the room, something that charts and graphs could not capture. The simple recognition that this moment would define not just policy but identity, would answer the question of who Earth wanted to be when the galaxy was watching. President Harper called for a vote at midnight, her own position clear, despite the political risks, and watched as the tally came in 63% in favor of accepting the refugees, offering temporary sanctuary while they figured out long-term solutions, committing resources that Earth could barely spare, but would find anyway. She addressed the world an hour later, knowing that her words would be translated into every human language and also into Kalari, knowing that Captain Vexta and his people were watching. "Today we had a choice," Harper said, looking directly into the camera. "We could have made the same calculation that 37 advanced civilizations made. Could have decided that our own problems were enough without taking on the galaxy's refugees. Could have sent them away with our apologies and our regrets and our very logical reasons why helping was simply impossible." She paused, letting the weight of that alternative settle. "But we are not like those civilizations. Not because we are better or wiser or richer, but because we remember what it feels like to be desperate. Because every nation represented in the United Nations was built by refugees or immigrants or people seeking shelter from storms they could not weather alone. And we refuse to become the kind of species that forgets where we came from." The aid packages began loading within hours. Food and medicine and supplies gathered from stockpiles and donations and emergency reserves. Ships preparing to deliver everything the Kalari needed to survive while Earth figured out what came next. Captain Danny Rodriguez commanded the UNSS Horizon, one of Earth's newest ships that was still primitive by galactic standards, but carried more hope than advanced technology. And when he docked with the Kalari lead vessel and saw Captain Vexta waiting, saw this alien being trying not to cry while accepting help his people desperately needed, Rodriguez felt something shift in his understanding of what humanity could be. "Sir," Rodriguez said, offering a handshake that Vexta had learned was a human gesture of respect. "We have medical teams ready to help you sick. Food enough for 3 months while we arrange more permanent support. And engineers who would like to look at your damaged systems if you will allow it." Vexta took the offered hand, his own appendage different but the meaning clear. "Why?" he asked, The question that had been burning in him since Ambassador Mitchell first offered help. Your species is young. You have so little compared to the civilizations that turned us away. Why would you give when you have so much less to give? Rodriguez smiled, a gesture that translated across species. Because we can, he said. And because someone needed us to, and honestly, sir, because it is the right thing to do. And we are trying very hard to be the kind of species that does right things even when they are difficult. The medical team spread through the Kalari fleet like hope made physical. Led by Dr. Lisa Chun, who had volunteered before the vote even finished. Who moved from ship to ship, treating the sick with supplies Earth had gathered in hours. Who held dying children and saved most of them and wept for the ones she could not. Sabian Kalori watched human volunteers working themselves to exhaustion. Watched these primitive beings giving everything they had. Watched and began to hope that maybe the galaxy was not entirely cold. That maybe somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, there was still light. A Kalari technical officer named Kor then approached Rodriguez after 3 days, carrying data that he had hesitated to share. Your ships, Corthan said carefully. They are centuries behind galactic standard. Your engine's inefficient, your power system's primitive. But your engineering is creative in ways I've never seen. Solving problems through innovation rather than raw power. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. My people have technology, knowledge, things we can share. But Captain Vex that says we cannot offer payment because you gave freely. Said that accepting our help as payment would insult the gift you gave. Rodriguez understood immediately. Understood the pride and gratitude tangled together. Then do not offer it as payment, he said. Offer it as friendship, as one engineer to another sharing ideas, as the beginning of learning from each other rather than one side owing the other. The first cultural exchange began that night when a young Kalari student named Shalan shared her artwork with human children via video link. Pictures of her destroyed homeworld mixed with images of hope, of ships and stars and the dream of finding home again. And human children responded with their own art, with messages of welcome. With the simple acceptance that children often manage better than adults, Ambassador Mitchell watched it all from the coordination center. Watched humanity rising to meet a challenge that logic said they should refuse. Watched and began to believe that maybe Earth had something to teach the galaxy, after all, not about technology or power, but about what it meant to be truly civilized. The International Committee met for the first time 2 weeks after the Kalari arrived. Representatives from 40 nations gathering to answer a question nobody had asked Earth before. How do you build a home for refugees from the stars when your own species barely understands the universe beyond your planet? Architect Andrew Park studied the proposals spread across the table, designs mixing human and Kalari needs, trying to imagine structures that would work for beings who saw in different spectrums, who needed different atmospheric mixtures, who carried trauma that architecture alone could never heal, orbital stations or ground settlement. Someone asked the question that had divided the committee from the start. Ground, said the Australian representative. A woman named Claire, who had been arguing for this since the beginning. We have land in the Northern Territory, space enough for a city if needed. And these people have been living in ships for months. They need soil under their feet. Need to feel permanent again. Senator Bradley attended as an observer. Still opposed but required to participate. And he raised the concerns that half of Earth was thinking, even if they were not saying them aloud. Security, he said. We know nothing about Kalari culture. Nothing about how they will integrate. Nothing about whether this works or becomes a disaster we cannot undo. The fears were real. Park knew fears that had sparked protests in major cities, demonstrations against accepting aliens, conspiracy theories about invasion disguised as refuge, terrorism threats against any settlement site that was announced. But there were other voices too. Louder voices, millions of humans who had watched the Kalari children and decided that fear was not enough reason to turn away. Teacher Ashley Morgan had volunteered for the first integrated education program before the committee even approved it, and started learning Kalari language through translation software, had prepared lesson plans for teaching human and Kalari children together because she believed that children were always the bridge between different worlds. The first class met in an orbital station converted from a storage facility. 12 human children and 8 Kalari children sitting in a circle while Morgan tried not to let her nervousness show. Tried to remember that these young beings were just children, despite looking nothing like human children. A Kalari girl named Shalane raised her hand with the tentative gesture of someone not sure if the rules were the same here. Yes, Shalane? Morgan said, proud that she pronounced the name correctly. Can I show the others my mathematics? Shalane asked, her voice small and uncertain. I do not want to seem like I'm showing off, but I love numbers, and maybe I can help? Morgan smiled and nodded, and for the next hour watched as this young refugee patiently tutored human children in mathematical concepts that Earth had not discovered yet. Watched her face light up with joy at being useful again, at having something to contribute instead of just receiving. The human boy sitting next to Shalane struggled with the advanced concepts, but he kept trying, kept asking questions. And when class ended, he turned to her with the simple directness of childhood. That was really cool, he said. Can you teach me more tomorrow? And maybe I can teach you about Earth animals. We have so many different animals. The interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds. But someone had recorded it, had shared it on social media. And within hours, millions of humans were watching this simple moment of connection. Watching fear dissolve in the face of actual relationship. Public opinion began shifting like a tide turning. Not everywhere, not everyone, but enough that the protests grew quieter while support grew louder. Captain Vextha addressed the United Nations 2 months after arriving, standing in the same chamber where they had voted to accept his people. Speaking words he had prepared carefully with Ambassador Mitchell's help. You gave freely when you owed us nothing, he said. His voice translated into every human language. You shared food when your own people were hungry. Shared medicine when your own sick needed care. Shared hope when we had none left. And now you offer us land, offer us home, offer us future. He paused, struggling with emotion. We cannot repay this debt, cannot make it equal. But we can offer what we have, our knowledge, our skills, our commitment to building something good together. Not as payment, but as family contributing to family. The Kalari scientists had already begun sharing agricultural techniques that worked in harsh conditions, helping human farmers grow food in deserts. Medical knowledge curing diseases that had plagued humanity for generations. Engineering insights improving spacecraft efficiency by percentages that seemed impossible. But Vextha insisted these were gifts, not payments. Insisted that accepting his people's help as transaction would cheapen what Earth had given. The settlement broke ground 3 months after first contact. A patch of northern territory that had been empty becoming the foundation for something unprecedented. Human and Kalari working side by side with hybrid technology that neither species could have. Built a lone park, watched the construction with satisfaction. Watched buildings rising that incorporated both human and Kalari aesthetic. Watched families moving into homes that felt permanent for the first time since their world burned. The community center opened first, a symbol of cooperation with walls displaying art from both species. With meeting rooms where different beings could gather. With a school where Shalane and her human friend attended classes. Together every day President Harper attended the dedication ceremony, cutting a ribbon while cameras from around the world watched. While Kalari and humans stood together celebrating something that advanced civilizations had said was impossible. This is not charity, Harper said to the assembled crowd. to the humans and Kalari listening, to the galaxy watching Earth with growing interest. This is family. This is what we build when we recognize that borders matter less than bonds, that differences matter less than dignity, that the measure of civilization is not how we treat those who are like us, but how we treat those who need us. The settlement grew week by week, month by month, becoming a place called New Haven that represented hope made physical. And children played in streets where two species learned to live together. Learned that friendship crossed any boundary, that fear tried to build. Ashley Morgan watched her students, human and Kalari, learning from each other, teaching each other, becoming friends in the way that only children could manage. And she thought about the protests that still happened in some cities, about the fear that still existed, about how much easier it was to hate from distance than to hate someone whose child played with your senator. Bradley visited the settlement 6 months after opening. Came expecting to find his fears confirmed. Came ready to document the problems that integration must be causing. Instead, he found a thriving community. Found Kalari engineers working alongside human counterparts, improving systems for everyone. Found elderly refugees teaching human students about stars and navigation. Found Shalan tutoring a classroom of human children who hung on her every word. A human father approached Bradley during the tour, a man who had lost his job and found new work in the settlement doing construction. I was against this, the man admitted. Protested when they announced the settlement. Thought we should take care of our own first. But my daughter made a friend here, Kalari girl who loves the same books. And watching them together, I realized I was wrong. Realized that taking care of our own meant taking care of anyone who needed us. Bradley returned to the capital quiet and thoughtful. Returned to opposition that suddenly felt hollow. Returned to find his own certainty, shaken by the simple reality that integration was working better than rejection ever had, and across the galaxy. Other refugee groups heard about Earth, heard about the primitive species that said yes when advanced civilizations said no. Heard and began hoping that maybe they too could find sanctuary among the humans who measured civilization not by technology but by compassion. The summons arrived 8 months after Earth accepted the Kalari. An official communication from the Galactic Council demanding Ambassador Mitchell appear before them to answer charges of violating established protocols, of interfering with natural development, of destabilizing the carefully maintained order that governed relations between civilizations. Mitchell stood in the council chambers 3 weeks later, the same grand hall where Captain Vexta had been rejected, surrounded by representatives from species so advanced they considered Earth barely more than clever animals. And she felt their contempt like radiation. The Thalaxian Chancellor opened the proceedings with formal language that barely disguised anger. The human species has violated protocols established over millennia, he said, his voice echoing through crystal columns, has accepted refugees without proper authorization, has integrated primitive technology with advanced knowledge, has disrupted systems designed to maintain galactic stability. Mitchell listened to the charges, listened to concern after concern that all circled around the same basic fear that Earth had shown them up, had revealed their carefully maintained excuses as exactly what they were. What destabilization? She asked when they finally let her speak. The Kalari are thriving, contributing to human society, helping us advance while we provide them safety. Where is the harm in this arrangement? The harm, said a Vrex representative, is that primitive species are not ready for advanced knowledge, are not capable of proper integration, are not equipped to handle the responsibilities that come with galactic citizenship. Mitchell felt anger rising but kept her voice level. We were not ready, she agreed. We are still not ready by your standards. Our technology is centuries behind. Our understanding of the universe limited. But we were ready to do the right thing, ready to help people who needed help. And apparently that is a kind of readiness that advanced civilizations have forgotten. The chamber erupted in protests and counter-arguments. Voices overlapping as species that had rejected the Kalari tried to justify their decisions, tried to explain why their rejection was logical, while Earth's acceptance was reckless. But Mitchell had been briefed by Kalari advisors, had learned how galactic politics actually worked, and she knew what this was really about. "You are not angry because we helped the Kalari," she said when the noise died down. "You are angry because we exposed your excuses. Because if primitive Earth can absorb refugees, then what excuse do advanced civilizations have for turning them away?" The Thalaxian chancellor glared at her with multifaceted eyes. "You understand nothing of the complexities involved, nothing of the economic realities, nothing of the cultural challenges that integration presents. I understand that you looked at suffering and calculated whether helping was convenient," Mitchell shot back. "I understand that you have technology that could feed millions, but chose not to share it. I understand that civilization is not measured by your power, but by your choices. And you chose comfort over compassion." She left the council chambers expecting sanctions, expecting punishment, but the galaxy was changing in ways the council could not control, could not suppress with formal protocols and official disapproval. 3 more refugee groups approached Earth that month, each carrying the same story of rejection from advanced worlds, each desperate enough to ask help from primitives. The Miran were aquatic beings fleeing environmental collapse on their world, their ships carrying the last survivors of a species, watching their oceans die. The Torvin fled religious persecution, hunted across the galaxy for beliefs that threatened no one except authoritarian governments that could not tolerate difference. The Jeks were genocide survivors, the remnants of a species nearly destroyed by neighbors who decided their resources were worth more than their lives. Each group had been turned away dozens of times. Each carried children who looked nothing like human children, but whose suffering was universal. Each came to Earth expecting rejection, but hoping for miracle. President Harper called a global referendum, knowing this decision was too large for governments alone, knowing that accepting more refugees would strain resources already stretched thin, knowing that saying yes meant real sacrifice. The debate raged across every nation, every city, every dinner table where humans argued about responsibility and capacity and what they owed to strangers from the stars. A 12-year-old boy named Ryan donated his entire savings to refugee support, started a campaign that spread through schools worldwide, children giving allowances and birthday money because they wanted to help. "My Kalari friend Shalan taught me her language," Ryan said in a video that went viral. "She helps me with math and I teach her about Earth animals, and we are best friends. I want more friends from other species. I want to learn from them and help them like Earth helped Shalan." The simplicity of childhood cut through complexity of adult arguments, reminded people that beneath policy and economics were actual beings seeking shelter. The referendum results came in 3 months after the question was posed. 73% voted yes, voted to accept more refugees despite the cost, voted to expand New Haven and build new settlements, voted to become the galaxy's sanctuary, whether the galaxy wanted them to or not. Colonel Ryan Foster led the expansion of orbital settlements, converting old stations and building new ones, creating space for thousands more refugees. And he worked with Kalari engineers who improved every design, who shared knowledge that made impossible projects possible. Private companies donated materials after public pressure, made refusing seem cruel, after consumers made clear they would support businesses that supported refugees. After the moral weight of the moment overwhelmed profit calculations, Earth doubled down on commitment to sanctuary, announced that any refugee group rejected by the galaxy would find consideration from humanity, made clear that being primitive did not mean being heartless. The Moran arrived first, their aquatic nature requiring different accommodations, and human engineers worked with Kalari advisors to build habitats that could sustain them. Underwater facilities off the coast where these beings could live while contributing knowledge about ocean ecology that helped Earth address its own environmental problems. The Torvin came next. Shy people whose religion centered on artistic expression, and they settled in areas where they could practice freely, where their art began influencing human culture, where differences were celebrated instead of persecuted. The Jeks were last. Traumatized survivors who needed time to heal, and human counselors worked with Kalari advisors to provide support, to create spaces where trauma could be acknowledged and addressed, where genocide survivors could begin to believe in future again. New Haven expanded from settlement to city, a place where 5 species lived together, where children played in mixed groups, where differences became normal instead of frightening, where the impossible happened every day. The galactic response was mixed. Some civilizations quietly began accepting more refugees, shamed by Earth's example into reconsidering their policies, while others doubled down on rejection, insisting their original decisions were correct. But something had shifted in the galaxy. A conversation starting about what advanced civilization meant, about whether technology without compassion was actually advancement, about whether primitive Earth understood something that the rest of them had. Forgotten Ambassador Mitchell received private communications from representatives of a dozen species. Quiet messages thanking Earth, admitting they had been wrong, asking how humanity made integration work when it seemed impossible. She answered honestly every time. It was not easy. It required sacrifice. It demanded that they see refugees as people instead of problems. But it was worth it because civilization meant taking care of each other, meant building communities instead of walls, meant choosing compassion even when convenience beckoned. Captain Vexthay watched the Moran settlement take shape and thought about his first arrival, about how close his people had come to dying in space, about how Earth had said yes when it should have said no. And he felt gratitude so deep it was almost painful. "You saved more than my people," he told Ambassador Mitchell during one of their regular meetings. "You saved my faith that the universe had some goodness left in it." Mitchell smiled, understanding more than he said. "You saved something in us too," she replied. "Reminded us what we could be when we tried." And across the galaxy, more refugee groups began turning their ships toward Earth, toward the primitive species that measured civilization not by technology, but by how they treated those who needed them most. 2 years after the Kalari first arrived, New Haven had grown into a thriving city where 5 species lived together in ways the galaxy insisted were impossible, where Kalari engineers worked alongside human counterparts, developing hybrid technologies that revolutionized both societies, where Moran ecologists helped restore Earth's dying oceans while learning from human determination, where Torvin artists created beauty that transcended species, where Jek survivors finally began to heal. Shine attended university now, studying medicine with the same dedication she had shown teaching human children mathematics. Her goal simple and profound: to become a doctor who could help any species, who could repay the kindness Earth showed when her people had nowhere else to go. The economic reports showed what Senator Bradley had finally admitted after his conversion, that refugee contributions exceeded costs, that integration brought benefits nobody had predicted, that New Haven had become an economic engine driving innovation across multiple fields. Human cities featured multi-species neighborhoods where difference was normal, where children grew up speaking multiple languages, where the boundaries between species mattered less each day. President Harper, now in her second term, walked through New Haven with pride, Watch the impossible made real through choice and effort and refusal to accept that compassion was impractical then. The Dominion fleet entered the solar system. 17 warships carrying the same force that had destroyed the Kalari homeworld. Moving toward Earth with weapons charged and demands transmitted ahead. Surrender all Kalari refugees immediately, the Dominion commander stated. His voice cold and absolute. They are criminals fleeing justice. They belong to the Dominion by right of conquest. You have 24 hours to comply or face consequences. The United Nations convened an emergency session. The same chamber where they had voted to accept refugees now filled with representatives facing the hardest choice, yet surrender the Kalari to almost certain death. Or fight a war against superior technology that Earth could not win. Senator Bradley spoke first. The former opponent, now defender. We promised them sanctuary, he said, his voice carrying conviction he had learned over 2 years. We told them they were safe. We told the galaxy that Earth protects those who seek refuge. And if we surrender them now, we prove that our word means nothing. The debate was shorter than the first time. The decision clearer despite the stakes being infinitely higher. Ambassador Mitchell transmitted Earth's response personally. Her voice steady despite understanding what it might cost. The Kalari are not criminals. They are refugees fleeing genocide, and Earth does not abandon family. We do not surrender people we promised to protect. We do not break our word because keeping it became dangerous. The Dominion commander laughed. A sound without humor. You are primitives playing at civilization. Your weapons are centuries behind. Your ships are toys. Your courage is stupidity. Surrender or be destroyed. Those are your only options. General Scott Williams commanded Earth's defense fleet. Ships that were still technologically inferior, but crewed by humans who refused to abandon refugees, who had learned from Kalari engineers, who understood that sometimes courage mattered more than firepower. We have faced worse odds, Williams told his fleet, repeating words humans had said throughout their history. And we are still here. The Kalari did not wait to be protected. Captain Vex that took command of a vessel crewed by both humans and Kalari. Volunteers who insisted on standing with Earth. You stood with us when you owed us nothing, Vex that transmitted to Williams. We stand with you now, because that is what family does. The Moran contributed what they could. Technical knowledge about shield harmonics. The Torvin offered supplies. The Jeks, who had survived genocide, understood the stakes. And every species Earth had sheltered, prepared to help however possible. The defensive line formed between the Dominion fleet and Earth. 17 primitive human ships facing 17 advanced warships. Odds that should have meant certain defeat, but something happened that the Dominion commander had not anticipated. Could not have predicted because it had never happened before in galactic history. The Galactic Council fleet arrived, not to fight Earth, but to stand with Earth. Dozens of advanced warships taking position alongside primitive human vessels. The Laxian Chancellor transmitted on open channels. His words broadcast across the galaxy. The Dominion demands we surrender refugees to certain death, he said, his voice carrying shame and determination mixed together. 2 years ago, we would have calculated whether intervention was convenient, would have debated economic costs and political complications, would have made the same cold decisions we always made. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was different, but Earth shamed us into remembering who we should be, showed us that civilization is not measured by technology, but by choices. And today, we choose to stand with those who protect the desperate instead of those who prey on them. 60 civilizations had sent ships. Species that had rejected refugees now protecting them. Advanced technologies that had been used for calculation now deployed for compassion. The Dominion commander found himself facing a unified fleet that outnumbered and outgunned his forces by orders of magnitude. Found his position impossible. found that Earth's choice had changed the galaxy in ways he could not fight. "This is not over," he transmitted before withdrawing. "The Dominion does not forget. Neither does Earth," Williams replied. "And now neither does the galaxy." The relief that followed felt like breathing after drowning. Felt like hope made physical. Felt like the moment when impossible became real. The Galactic Council formally convened 3 months later. Not to condemn Earth, but to honor it, voting to give humanity permanent seat on the Council, despite technological classification. Recognizing that some wisdom transcended advancement, Ambassador Mitchell proposed the Sanctuary Accords, protocols ensuring refugee rights across galactic civilization, and 60 species signed immediately. Pledging to follow Earth's example, Captain Vecta became Earth's ambassador to Kalari homeworld reconstruction, leading efforts to rebuild what the Dominion destroyed, carrying with him the lesson Earth taught, that strength meant protecting others. The refugee ships kept coming, word spreading that Earth welcomed those the galaxy rejected. And humanity kept saying yes, kept building settlements, kept proving that compassion was practical. New Haven celebrated its 5th anniversary with a festival that filled the streets. Human and Kalari, and Moran and Torvin and Jack celebrating together. Children playing without caring about species differences. Families built from choice instead of biology. President Harper stood on a stage watching the celebration, watching what 2 years of choice and sacrifice had built, watching the impossible made normal. Shellan gave a speech. Dr. Shellan now graduated early and already working in the hospital where she saved lives across species. 5 years ago, "My people had nowhere to go," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. 37 civilizations turned us away. 37 times we were told that helping us was impossible or impractical or simply inconvenient. She paused, composing herself. Then we came to Earth, to a species that had every reason to say no, that had their own problems and limited resources and no obligation to help strangers from the stars. Tears fell from her eyes as she continued. But Earth did not see strangers. Earth saw family. Earth saw people who needed help, and decided that was enough reason to give it. And in saving us, they reminded the galaxy what civilization truly means. The crowd erupted in applause from multiple species, different hands making the same gesture of appreciation. Every galaxy turned us away, Shellan finished, her voice breaking with emotion. But Earth said, "We are safe now." And that promise changed everything, changed us, changed the galaxy, changed what we all believe is possible. Harper watched former Senator Bradley standing in the crowd with a Kalari family he had sponsored. Watched Ashley Morgan with her mixed species classroom. Watched Ryan, now 15 and studying xenobiology. Watched Vextha standing with human officers who had become his brothers. The festival continued into the night. Celebration of what happened when species chose compassion over convenience. When primitive civilization taught advanced societies about being civilized. When refugees became family, and family meant everyone who needed sanctuary. Ambassador Mitchell stood at the edge of the celebration with a quiet smile, thinking about that first transmission when Captain Vextha asked for help. Thinking about how close Earth came to saying no. Thinking about everything that changed, because they said yes. "You look satisfied," Vextha said. Joining her, "I am," Mitchell replied, watching the celebration. "We proved something important, that civilization is not about technology or power. It is about what we do when someone needs us." Vextha nodded, his 4 eyes watching the same scene. "You taught the galaxy that lesson," he said quietly. "Reminded all of us that being advanced means nothing if we forget to be kind." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching humans and Kalari and Moran and Torvin and Jack celebrating the anniversary of the day Earth became sanctuary. The day primitive species showed the galaxy what true civilization looked like. The day compassion proved stronger than fear. and across the universe. Refugee ships kept turning toward Earth, toward the blue planet where the answer to